What would you do if someone from your past suddenly reappeared, turning your world upside down? For Evelyn, a single mother on a long-awaited cruise with her daughters, everything changes when a familiar face from her past, a world-famous chef, walks back into her life. Secrets are revealed, emotions run high, and a decision must be made that could change everything. Stay tuned as we dive into this emotional story of love, regret, and second chances. You won't want to miss a moment. The ocean stretched endlessly, its deep blue waves shimmering under the golden glow of the setting sun. The luxury cruise ship Celestial Dream loomed in the distance, a floating city of opulence and wonder. But for Evelyn Matthews, standing in the chaotic terminal with her twin daughters, it felt more like a leap of faith than a dream vacation. "Mom, are we really going on that?" Alice, the more curious of the two, pointed at the massive ship, her eyes wide with excitement. Daisy, her quieter twin, clung to Evelyn's hand, her pigtails bouncing as she whispered, "It's so big. What if we get lost?" Evelyn knelt down, brushing a strand of hair from Daisy's face. "We won't get lost, sweetheart. I promise. This is going to be an adventure, just the three of us." She smiled, but her heart raced. This trip had cost her everything, months of saving, skipping meals, and working double shifts as a part-time nurse. But it was worth it. Her girls deserved this. They deserved to feel like the world was theirs, even if just for a week. Meanwhile, at the VIP entrance, Mark Anderson stepped out of a sleek black car, his tailored suit and confident stride exuding the aura of a man who had it all. The world-renowned chef was here for one reason: to headline the Celestial Dream's exclusive gastronomy festival. Cameras flashed as he adjusted his cufflinks, his assistant rattling off his packed schedule. "Chef Anderson, the press conference is at 7, followed by the welcome dinner. Don't forget, the investors will be watching closely tonight." Mark nodded, his mind already racing through the dishes he'd prepare. This cruise wasn't just another event. It was a chance to secure funding for his dream restaurant in New York. But, as he boarded the ship, a strange unease settled over him, like a whisper from a past he'd long buried. As the ship's horn blared, signaling its departure, Evelyn and Mark stepped aboard from opposite ends of the vessel. Neither knew that their carefully constructed lives were about to collide in ways they could never have imagined. Evelyn Matthews stood on the upper deck of the Celestial Dream, her hands gripping the railing as the ship began to glide away from the port. The salty breeze brushed against her face, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to exhale. Below her, Alice and Daisy were running in circles near the pool, their laughter echoing through the air. Evelyn smiled faintly. This was why she had worked so hard to see her daughters happy, carefree, and full of life. But beneath her calm exterior, Evelyn's mind was a storm of worries. She had spent the last 2 years juggling part-time nursing shifts and freelance caregiving jobs, scraping together every penny to afford this trip. It wasn't just about the vacation, it was about giving her daughters something she had never had, a sense of adventure, a memory they could hold on to forever. Yet, no matter how much she tried to focus on the present, the past always found a way to creep in. "Mom, look!" Alice's voice snapped her out of her thoughts. Evelyn turned to see her daughter pointing at the horizon, where the sun was dipping into the ocean. "It's like the sky is on fire," Alice exclaimed, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's beautiful," Evelyn replied softly, though her gaze lingered on her daughters longer than the sunset. They were growing up so fast, and every day they reminded her more of him, the man she had tried so hard to forget. On the other side of the ship, Mark Anderson was pacing in his suite, his assistant trailing behind him with a clipboard. The room was immaculate, with sleek modern furniture and a panoramic view of the ocean, but Mark barely noticed. His mind was consumed by the week ahead: cooking demonstrations, media interviews, and most importantly, a private dinner with investors who could make or break his dream of opening a flagship restaurant in New York. "Chef Anderson, the press is already asking about your signature dish for the welcome dinner," his assistant said, flipping through her notes. "Should I tell them it's the truffle soufflé?" Mark waved her off. "They'll find out soon enough," he muttered, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He had built his career on precision and control, but lately something felt off. Despite his success, there was a nagging emptiness he couldn't shake, a feeling that no amount of accolades or Michelin stars could fill. As he stared out the window, watching the waves ripple against the ship's hull, a memory surfaced, one he had buried long ago. It was of a small cafe, a young woman with a warm smile, and a promise he had broken. Mark shook his head, forcing the thought away. This week was about the future, not the past. The Celestial Dream was alive with activity as passengers explored its endless amenities. Evelyn held tightly to Daisy's hand while Alice skipped ahead, her excitement uncontainable. The girls had begged to see the ship's grand atrium, a towering space with a crystal chandelier that sparkled like 1,000 stars. Evelyn couldn't help but smile at their awe. Though her own nerves were beginning to fray, she had spent so long planning this trip, but now that they were here, she couldn't shake the feeling that something unexpected was about to happen. "Mom, can we go to the pool after this?" Alice asked, spinning around to face her. "Please? I want to see if it's as big as the pictures." "We'll see," Evelyn replied, her voice soft but distracted. She glanced at her phone, checking her budget app for the 3rd time that day. Every meal, every activity had to be carefully planned. There was no room for mistakes. Meanwhile, on the lower deck, Mark Anderson was in the middle of a heated conversation with the event coordinator. "What do you mean my suite isn't ready?" Mark's voice was calm but edged with irritation. "There was a mix-up with the room assignments," the coordinator stammered, flipping through her clipboard. "We've temporarily placed you in a different cabin until we can sort it out. It's just for tonight." Mark sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Fine. Just make sure it's resolved by morning. I have enough to deal with already." With his assistant trailing behind him, Mark made his way to the temporary cabin. He was too preoccupied with his schedule to notice the number on the door, or the fact that it wasn't his name on the reservation. Evelyn had just finished unpacking when there was a knock at the door. She frowned, glancing at the twins, who were sprawled on the bed, giggling over a shared tablet. "Stay here," she said, walking to the door. When she opened it, her breath caught in her throat. Standing there, looking just as surprised as she felt, was Mark Anderson. "Evelyn," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest. She hadn't seen him in 8 years, not since he had walked out of her life without so much as a goodbye. And now, here he was, standing in the doorway of her cabin, looking every bit the polished, successful man she had once dreamed he would become. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice sharper than she intended. Mark blinked, clearly caught off guard. I think there's been a mistake. This is supposed to be my room." Evelyn crossed her arms, her protective instincts kicking in. "Well, it's not. So if you don't mind." She stepped forward, ready to close the door, but Mark didn't move. His eyes flicked past her, landing on the twins. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Mark's gaze lingered on Alice and Daisy, his expression shifting from confusion to something deeper, something that made Evelyn's stomach twist. "Are they—" he started, but Evelyn cut him off. "No," she said firmly, her voice trembling with anger. "They're none of your business." Mark opened his mouth to respond, but Evelyn didn't give him the chance. She slammed the door in his face, her hands shaking as she leaned against it. Behind her, the twins looked up, their innocent faces full of curiosity. "Who was that, Mom?" Daisy asked. "You someone who made a mistake," Evelyn said, forcing a smile. "Now, who's ready for dinner?" But as she ushered her daughters out of the room, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something she wasn't ready to face. Evelyn couldn't sleep that night. The soft hum of the ship's engines and the gentle rocking of the waves should have been soothing, but her mind was racing. Seeing Mark again had stirred up emotions she thought she had buried long ago, anger, hurt, and something else she didn't want to name. She glanced at her daughters who were fast asleep in the small bed beside hers, their faces peaceful and innocent. Evelyn's chest tightened. She had worked so hard to protect them from the pain of her past, and now, in the span of a single evening, it felt like everything was unraveling. On the other side of the ship, Mark sat in his temporary cabin, staring at the ceiling. He couldn't get the image of Evelyn or the two little girls out of his head. The resemblance was undeniable. Their eyes, their smiles. It was like looking at a reflection of himself as a child. But how could that be possible? Evelyn had never told him she was pregnant. If they were his daughters, why had she kept them a secret? The next morning, Evelyn tried to keep her routine as normal as possible. She took Alice and Daisy to breakfast in the ship's grand dining hall, where the girls marveled at the endless buffet of pastries, fruits, and pancakes. Evelyn forced herself to smile, but her nerves were on edge. She couldn't shake the feeling that Mark would show up at any moment. And she was right. Mark entered the dining hall, his tall frame and confident stride immediately drawing attention. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on Evelyn and the twins. For a moment he hesitated, unsure of how to approach her, but then he squared his shoulders and walked over, determined to get answers. "Evelyn," he said, his voice low but firm, "we need to talk." Evelyn froze, her fork hovering mid-air. She glanced at her daughters, who were too busy giggling over their pancakes to notice the tension. "Not here," she hissed, standing up and motioning for him to follow her out of the dining hall. They found a quiet corner on the deck, away from the other passengers. Evelyn crossed her arms, her expression guarded. "What do you want, Mark?" "I want the truth," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Are they mine?" Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest. She had rehearsed this conversation in her head 1,000 times over the years, but now that it was happening, she didn't know what to say. "Why does it matter?" she finally replied, her voice trembling. "You left, Mark. You made your choice." Mark flinched, guilt flashing across his face. "I didn't know, Evelyn. If I had known—" "You would have what?" she interrupted, her voice rising. "Stayed? Given up your career? Don't lie to me, Mark. You were always going to choose your dreams over us." Mark took a step closer, his eyes searching hers. "Maybe I would have, but I deserved to know. I still deserve to know." Evelyn looked away, tears stinging her eyes. She had spent years convincing herself that she had done the right thing by keeping Mark out of their lives. But now, standing in front of him, she wasn't so sure. "They're yours," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Alice and Daisy are your daughters." Mark's breath caught in his throat. He had suspected it, but hearing the words out loud was something else entirely. He felt a strange mix of joy, regret, and fear. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice breaking. Evelyn wiped her eyes, her anger giving way to exhaustion. "Because I didn't want them to grow up waiting for someone who was never going to come back." Mark opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, a voice interrupted them. "Mom? Who's this?" Evelyn turned to see Alice and Daisy standing a few feet away, their curious eyes darting between her and Mark. Evelyn's heart sank. She wasn't ready for this conversation, but it seemed she no longer had a choice. "This is an old friend," Evelyn said, forcing a smile. "Why don't you two go back inside? I'll be there in a minute." But Alice and Daisy didn't move. Instead, they looked at Mark, their identical brown eyes filled with curiosity. "Are you the chef from the posters?" Alice asked, tilting her head. "We saw your picture in the lobby." Mark crouched down to their level, his heart pounding. "I am," he said, his voice soft. "Do you like cooking?" Alice nodded enthusiastically. "I want to be a chef when I grow up. Mom says I'm really good at making sandwiches." Mark chuckled, his chest tightening. "Well, maybe I can teach you a few tricks while we're on the ship." Evelyn watched the exchange, her emotions swirling. She had spent so long keeping Mark out of their lives, but now, seeing him with the girls, she couldn't help but wonder if she had made a mistake. Evelyn spent the rest of the day avoiding Mark. She kept Alice and Daisy busy with activities, a scavenger hunt on the ship, a visit to the arcade, and even a movie night in the onboard theater. But no matter how hard she tried to distract herself, she couldn't escape the weight of their earlier conversation. Mark knew the truth now, and there was no undoing it. Mark, on the other hand, was relentless. He had spent years perfecting the art of persistence in the kitchen, and he wasn't about to give up now. He needed to talk to Evelyn again, to explain himself, to prove that he wasn't the same man who had walked away all those years ago. But every time he tried to approach her, she found a way to slip away. By the second evening, the tension between them had started to attract attention. The celestial dream was a small world, and whispers traveled fast. Passengers began to notice the way Mark's eyes followed Evelyn and the twins, the way Evelyn seemed to avoid him at all costs. It didn't take long for rumors to spread. "Did you hear? That famous chef, Mark Anderson, might have kids on board. I saw him talking to that woman with the twins. They look just like him." The gossip reached the ears of a freelance journalist who was covering the gastronomy festival. Sensing a potential scoop, she began digging for details, snapping photos of Mark and Evelyn from a distance and asking pointed questions to the ship staff. Evelyn was oblivious to the growing speculation until she overheard two passengers whispering near the pool. "I heard he's trying to reconnect with his family," one woman said, her voice low but excited. "It's so romantic, don't you think?" Evelyn's stomach dropped. She grabbed Alice and Daisy's hands and hurried them back to their cabin, her mind racing. She had worked so hard to keep her life private, to shield her daughters from the chaos of the world, and now, in the span of 2 days, everything was unraveling. A knock at the door startled her. She hesitated, her heart pounding, before opening it to find Mark standing there, his expression a mix of determination and regret. "We need to talk," he said, his voice firm but gentle. Evelyn stepped outside, closing the door behind her to keep the girls from hearing. "What do you want, Mark?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Haven't you done enough?" Mark ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "I didn't come here to hurt you, Evelyn. I need to be a part of their lives. They're my daughters. I can't just walk away from that." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "You don't get to decide that now. You had your chance, Mark, and you left. You don't know what it's been like raising them on my own, answering their questions about why they don't have a dad." Mark's voice softened. "I know I made mistakes. I was young and I was selfish. But I'm here now, and I want to make it right. Please, Evelyn, let me try." Evelyn shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "It's not that simple. You can't just show up and expect everything to be okay. They don't even know who you are." Mark hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Then let me tell them. Let me be honest with them. They deserve to know the truth." Before Evelyn could respond, a flash of light caught her attention. She turned to see the journalist standing a few feet away, her camera raised. "Excuse me," the woman said, her tone overly polite. "Chef Anderson, would you care to comment on the rumors about your family?" Evelyn's face turned pale. "What is this?" she demanded, stepping in front of Mark. The journalist smiled, undeterred. "People are curious, Ms. Matthews. Is it true that your daughters are his? The resemblance is uncanny." Mark stepped forward, his expression dark. "That's enough," he said firmly. "This is a private matter, and I won't have you harassing her or the girls." The journalist raised an eyebrow. "So you're not denying it?" Mark hesitated, glancing at Evelyn. She shook her head slightly, silently pleading with him not to make things worse. But Mark had never been one to back down from a challenge. "I'm not denying anything," he said, his voice steady. "But I won't discuss this with you, now if you'll excuse us." He took Evelyn's arm and guided her back into the cabin, closing the door behind them. Evelyn turned to him, her eyes blazing. "What the hell was that?" she demanded. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry, Evelyn, but I'm not going to let them twist this into something it's not. I'm not ashamed of being their father." Evelyn stared at him, her emotions warring within her. Part of her wanted to scream at him for complicating her life even further, but another part of her, a small, quiet part, was touched by his determination. The rumors about Mark and Evelyn spread like wildfire across the ship. Curious passengers began watching their every move, snapping photos, and eavesdropping on snippets of conversations. Evelyn felt like her life was spiraling out of control. She had spent years protecting her daughters from the spotlight, but now everything seemed to be unraveling. Mark, on the other hand, remained composed. He was no stranger to public attention, having spent years in the limelight as a celebrity chef. But this time it wasn't just about him. It was about Evelyn and the two little girls he now knew were his. He knew he had to tread carefully, but he also couldn't stand by while people speculated about his family like it was some kind of tabloid story. The situation came to a head that evening at the ship's grand gala. It was the most anticipated event of the cruise, where passengers dressed in their finest attire and enjoyed a lavish dinner prepared by none other than Mark himself. Evelyn had planned to skip the event, but Alice and Daisy begged her to go. We want to see the famous chef cook," Alice said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Reluctantly, Evelyn agreed, but she had no idea the night would change everything. As the gala began, Mark took the stage to welcome the guests. Dressed in his pristine white chef's uniform, he looked confident and composed, but when his eyes landed on Evelyn's table, where she sat with the twins, he paused for a moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his deep voice resonating through the room. "It's an honor to be here tonight, not just as a chef, but as a man trying to make amends for the mistakes of his past." Evelyn froze, her fork suspended mid-air. She knew exactly where this was going, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "Some of you may have heard the rumors," Mark continued, his gaze fixed on Evelyn. "And I want to set the record straight. I'm not ashamed of the truth. In fact, I'm proud to say that I am the father of two incredible little girls sitting right over there." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Evelyn and the twins. Alice and Daisy looked at each other, confused but curious. "You're our dad?" Alice asked, her small voice cutting through the quiet. Mark stepped off the stage and knelt in front of the girls. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am. And I'm so sorry I wasn't there for you before, but I want to be here now, if you'll let me." Evelyn felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she didn't know if they were from anger, heartbreak, or relief. She had worked so hard to keep everything under control, but now it was all out in the open. The events of the gala quickly spread beyond the ship. Passengers posted videos and photos online, and within hours the story of the celebrity chef and his secret family was trending on social media. Mark found himself under immense pressure. Some people praised him for taking responsibility and being honest, while others accused him of using his personal life for publicity. Evelyn, meanwhile, felt like her world had been turned upside down. Strangers flooded her social media accounts with messages, some supportive, but most nosy or judgmental. "I can't believe you did this," she said to Mark the next morning as they met on the ship's deck. "You've turned my life and my daughter's lives into a circus." Mark looked at her, guilt etched across his face. "I didn't mean to make things harder for you, but I couldn't keep hiding, Evelyn. I want the girls to know who I am, and I want you to know that I'm serious about being in their lives." Evelyn sighed, exhaustion washing over her. "Serious? Mark, this isn't some reality show. This is my life, and I don't know if I can trust you." Mark stepped closer, his eyes steady and sincere. "Give me a chance, Evelyn. Not for me, but for them. They deserve to have a father, even if I'm not perfect." Evelyn stayed silent, staring out at the endless ocean. She knew Mark was right, but the fear and pain she had carried for so long were hard to let go of. The days following the gala were a whirlwind of emotions for Evelyn. She avoided the public areas of the ship, trying to shield Alice and Daisy from the growing attention. But no matter how hard she tried, the questions lingered in her mind. Could she trust Mark? Could he really be the father her daughters deserved? Or was this just another fleeting moment in his life, one he would eventually walk away from? Mark, on the other hand, refused to give up. He spent every spare moment trying to connect with Alice and Daisy. He joined them for activities on the ship, helping them decorate cupcakes in the kids' club, teaching them how to fold napkins into fancy shapes at dinner, and even showing them how to properly hold a chef's knife during a cooking demonstration. The girls were drawn to him, their natural curiosity and excitement overriding any hesitation. "Mom, did you know Dad can make a swan out of an apple?" Daisy asked one evening, her eyes wide with wonder. Evelyn forced a smile, but her heart ached. She could see how much the girls were beginning to adore Mark, and it terrified her. What if he let them down? What if he left again? On the second to last night of the cruise, Mark found Evelyn sitting alone on the deck, staring out at the dark ocean. The moonlight reflected off the water, casting a soft glow over her face. "Evelyn," he said gently, taking a seat beside her. She didn't look at him. "What do you want, Mark?" "I want to talk," he said. "Really talk. No cameras, no audience, just us." Evelyn sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent years building a life for me and the girls, a life without you, and now in just a few days you've turned everything upside down." Mark nodded, his expression serious. "I know, and I'm sorry for that. But I can't change the past, Evelyn. All I can do is try to be better now, for you and for them." Evelyn finally turned to face him, her eyes filled with tears. "Do you have any idea how hard it's been, answering their questions about why they don't have a dad, watching them make Father's Day cards for someone who wasn't there?" Mark's jaw tightened, guilt washing over him. "I can't take back the years I missed," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I want to be there for them now. I want to be the father they deserve. And I want to be there for you too, if you'll let me." Evelyn shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know if I can trust you, Mark. I don't know if I can let you in." Mark reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. "I know it's not going to be easy, but I'm not going anywhere this time. I promise." The next morning, Evelyn woke up to the sound of laughter. She stepped out onto the balcony of their cabin and saw Mark on the deck below, teaching Alice and Daisy how to flip pancakes on a portable griddle. The girls were giggling uncontrollably, their faces lit up with joy. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, Mark could be the father they needed. Later that day, she found him in the ship's cafe, sipping a cup of coffee. She sat down across from him, her expression serious but calm. "Mark," she began, her voice steady, "if you want to be in their lives, it's not going to be on your terms. It's going to be on mine. You're going to have to prove to me and to them that you're here to stay." Mark nodded, his eyes filled with determination. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said. Evelyn took a deep breath, her heart pounding. "Then we'll start slow. No big gestures, no promises you can't keep. Just be there. Show up. That's all I ask." Mark smiled, relief washing over him. "I can do that," he said. As they shook hands, a sense of cautious optimism filled the air. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, Evelyn allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way forward together. Life is full of second chances, but they're never easy. Evelyn and Mark's story reminds us that forgiveness, trust, and love take time, but they're worth fighting for. What would you do in Evelyn's shoes? Would you give someone a second chance? Or would the past be too hard to overcome? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt tales about life, love, and the unexpected twists that bring us together. Share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear your perspective. And as always, thank you for watching. See you in the next video.